Hey, friends. I find myself I find myself looking at something that it on the surface of things it sounds kind of like a downer, but it's actually like the ultimate empowerment. And I spoke a little bit about this while I was in San Francisco for our friend's memorial, because being at a memorial kind of puts you up close and personal with the fact of impermanence, the fact that lives end. Watching someone who's been a figure in your life for all of your life show up in a little wooden box, it puts things in perspective. And it was just, as these things often are, I found myself I caught an email from a friend of mine, Kyle, and his video of the week or of the day, whatever, is about everything is temporary. And I didn't watch the video, but I have a feeling I know what the video is. I have a feeling it's an excerpt from an event that I attended and where I heard him speak about this. And the post that I did while I was on my trip, which sort of spoke to this very directly, was called "See Paris First," and it's a poem about how if all your fears and the thing that you were most deathly afraid of were located in Paris, then of course you would avoid Paris and you would probably avoid France, and before you knew it you'd be trying to avoid the entire globe, because this fear would feel like you were always just a little too close for comfort. And the poem ends with this line saying, what you need is a friend who would know your secret and convince you to see Paris first. Which I thought was just such a beautiful image. Such a kind of poetic and beautiful way of encapsulating the fact that our biggest, whatever that biggest fear is, until we face it, it's going to run our lives. It's going to masquerade as other fears. It's going to take the form of other fears that might seem more manageable or more ignorable, because we don't really want to go right to the heart and admit that we are temporary, that everything is temporary. And I've continued to reflect on this, and I've as I've come home and reconnected with my family, I feel like I've also observed how how those fears affect our relationships. We can't really be in relationship through the shroud of fear. It won't allow true connection. And that's true of our partner, that's true of our friends, that's even true of our children. Our connection will be diluted and obscured to the extent that we allow fear in. And that's a big one. This is why I said sometimes seems a little bit like a downer upon initial observation. But we just watched this evening the Disney Pixar film, Inside Out, which is one of the, I hadn't seen it in several years, but I remembered it being just a phenomenal film. And we watched it with Annalise, age 5, and it was kind of profound to watch her take it in and take on the implications of it. And it was, we immediately at bedtime started talking about it. If you haven't seen Inside Out, the Pixar film, it's about a little girl who moves from her childhood home of Minnesota to San Francisco when she's 11 years old. But the story takes place entirely inside her head, and the main characters that we're following are her emotions. Joy is sort of the protagonist. Joy and sadness are kind of like co-protagonists, but we also have anger, disgust, and fear. And these are literal characters in her head that sort of vie for control and take control in appropriate moments and inappropriate moments. It's a totally ingenious film, and I've heard it discussed as having had an effect on the entire, it's been around for it's almost 10 years old, so it's had an effect on 10 years worth of kids who are able to speak about the emotions in their minds and the emotions in their bodies and minds, the voices in their heads, in a whole new way because of this depiction of them. And Annalise just took it and ran with it. We talked about it all through bedtime. We talked about the different things that give her these voices in her head, like what kinds of activities. She said when she feels joy in her head, when she feels fear, when she feels anger, when she feels sadness, when she feels disgust. And the moral of the story, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but the lesson learned by the protagonist, which is Joy, and Joy thinks that because she's how this little girl stays happy, she thinks she always has to be in control. And her lesson and our lesson over the course of the film is that sadness needs to be allowed to take hold. Sadness needs to be allowed to run the show, to turn memories sad, to direct our thinking, to interact. Sadness needs to be allowed in order for us to process big things and be able to move through them. If we're not allowed to feel sad, then we will get stuck and we will not be able to move through things. And it was the perfect lesson, it was the perfect movie for us to watch. It contains so many lessons that I think are really useful and helpful in communicating with a child. But it also came back to me that this letting in the fact that we are temporary, letting in the fact that all of this is temporary, it inherently calls upon us to feel more of our emotions. It inherently calls upon us to let more of ourselves be felt. Because we can't just be in like the normal kind of like, here we go, this is our joy train, or our, whatever our habitual emotion is. We can't just be in that. When we realize it's all temporary, it's like it mixes. All the emotions can begin to color every moment, and every moment becomes more rich. Every moment becomes more profound, more deep. So somewhere between a funeral and a Disney film, I'm finding a new way of talking about all this with my daughter, and a new way of thinking about it for myself, where I almost invite my own sense of temporariness, my own sense of mortality. It's weird to say I want to bring that more into my awareness, but it's actually true. Like that actually feels like one of the best things I can do, because it awakens me. That's where I am today, folks. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you soon.